We're in Jericho, the oldest city in the world.
All right, let's see it.
The book of Joshua says that when the Israelites encircled this town and marched around it, the walls just fell straight down and out, creating a ramp.
The book of Joshua does not say the walls fell down and out, creating a ramp. Joshua 6:20 says, Vatipol hachoma tachteha, which means, and fell the wall in its place. It just means it crumbled or collapsed straight down.
That's what the archaeologists found. John Garstang in the 1930s, Kathleen Kenyon in the 1950s found that the wall came tumbling down and created a ramp.
This is absolutely what Garstang and Kenyon found when they excavated. However, they didn't even excavate half of the wall. And there has been a more recent excavation by an Italian team led by Lorenzo Nigro that has excavated more of the wall. And they have actually found that other parts of the wall didn't fall outward, creating this ramp. There are a variety of different ways the wall was destroyed, and some of the wall remains intact. Probably about 10% of what has been excavated appears to be mostly intact. So this is appealing to an outdated understanding of what happened to this wall and is not presenting the most recent research.
You're looking at an excavated area where the mud bricks just came straight down. By the way, the only city in the world we know that has happened to is here. Whenever you siege a city, you'd normally put a battering ram up against it and knock the walls in. Not here in Jericho. All the walls just came straight down.
So you'll note the manipulative use of language here. Garstang and Kenyon excavated somewhere around 30 to 40% of this particular Bronze Age Cyclopean wall that was around Jericho. About 90% of what they excavated had fallen and had fallen outward. This led Kenyon to suggest maybe this was an earthquake. There were other earlier walls that had fallen around Jericho that they said definitely an earthquake. Here they're saying that's what it might be. The text says the wall fell in its place, and that is suggestive of the conceptualization of this wall collapsing in on itself. Is material going to fall inward and or outward? Absolutely. But this apologist is saying, oh, it says the wall fell straight down, meaning it fell outward. The language of Joshua 6 does not indicate this wall fell outward and not inward. That is something that is being imposed upon the text by the apologist who needs the text to be saying exactly what we find in the material remains. The wall did not fall straight down outward, according to Joshua 6. Now, this also ignores the more recent excavations, which have uncovered more of this Cyclopean wall that was destroyed, according to Kenyon, as well as the more recent Italian excavations around the middle of the 16th century BCE. These more recent excavations suggest that its destruction is more consistent with an invasion, probably one of the Egyptian pharaohs.
Except for one section in the north where Rahab allegedly lived, according to the Bible.
So this is some ambiguous language that strikes me as manipulative as well, because the statement that all the walls fell outward except for one section in the north where Rahab allegedly lived, according to the Bible, makes it sound like the Bible said Rahab lived in the north. The Bible says absolutely no such thing whatsoever. But you could say, no, I didn't mean it like that. What I meant was there was a section of the wall where Rahab allegedly lived, according to the Bible, and in the north, there's a section of wall that remains. But the way it's worded makes it sound like we got another bullseye, and that the only part of the city wall that didn't fall is precisely where the Bible said Rahab lived. And I don't know if that is just sloppy use of language or intentionally using ambiguity to try to gin up a sense of more evidentiary support than there actually is. But at best, the Bible suggests Rahab lived along the city wall.
In any event, you see that dark area right down there? That's the burn layer from 1406, the biblical dating for the Exodus. And Kathleen Kenyon's dating of the 1550 is shown to be false because they found in this city not only the proper pottery to date the burn at about 1400, but also pharaohs from Egypt that went all the way up to Amenhotep III. Amenhotep III ended his reign about 1424 BC. How could they find scarabs in a city that had been abandoned for more than 100 years? For Amenhotep III, they couldn't. Amenhotep III was in power, and the scarabs from Egypt came here, and then the city was burned in 1406. That's the burn layer for it.
So now things are getting significantly more complex. We've got the excavations of Garstang, Kenyon, and Negro to consider. Garstang excavated a wall that collapsed at Jericho and dated it to the end of the 1400s BCE, just like this apologist wants to date a different wall. Kenyon came in and said, oh, you got that wrong. We have the pottery much better figured out now. This wall is actually an early Bronze Age wall. This is 3rd millennium BCE when this fell. Garstang said, my bad. Kenyon said, oh, we've got this other wall that fell around 1550 BCE, based on the fact that the style of the wall matched several other Middle Bronze Age walls from other nearby cities. And the 1550 dating was corroborated by radiocarbon dating from that time period, which was admittedly not very robust. Now, Kenyon said this city was not a significant occupation. After its collapse in 1550 BCE, it would not be occupied again for around 150 years or so, which would mean for the last 75 years or so, we've imagined that there shouldn't have been anybody at Jericho. The current excavations by the Italian team have uncovered a smaller, modest occupation after the 1550 destruction. So Kenyon was wrong, or at least not precise enough, in saying that it seems to have been unoccupied. It was occupied, and this can account for the pottery and the scarabs and some of the C14 dating. Now, in 1990, a dude named Bryant Wood published a paper in Biblical Archaeology Review saying, oh, Kenyon was all wrong about all this stuff. Pottery, scarabs, C14 dating, this all indicates that the destruction occurred at the end of the 1400s BCE. This was Joshua. And then shortly after that, another archaeologist named Piotr Bienkowski published a response pointing out we've got a lot of problems with this argument. And then Bryant Wood published a response to that response saying, nuh-uh. Now, the majority of archaeologists have said Bienkowski got the better end of that argument. It didn't shift the consensus view. Now, what the Italian excavations have done is uncover a lot more of the city, find a lot more data, incorporate more recent radiocarbon dating, such as from this article from the mid-1990s, which more confidently dates this destruction level to 1550 to 1520 BCE. So archaeologists are even more confident now that that dating is correct. Now, another apologist named Titus Kennedy published a paper in a rather questionable journal called Religions in 2023 saying, no, they're wrong. It's actually what Garstang and Wood said all along. Make some corrections here and there. Says, they got this, that, and the other wrong. However, the best conclusion is still end of the 1400s BCE. That paper has not managed to shift the consensus much. The most robust accounting of this destruction is still that provided by the Italian team, which dates it to the middle of the 16th century BCE, 1550-ish, is still the consensus view regarding the destruction of the Cyclopean walls of Jericho. There was some inhabitation after that, but it was pretty modest. There was a wall that seems to have been built we don't really have any evidence for any kind of destruction of that wall that would in any way line up with the biblical text. Apologists, as we have seen with Mike Jones and others, are certainly trying to make it sound like, at least it's not impossible, that that later wall fell, but they don't really have any positive evidence that it has anything to do with any historical Joshua.
The Bible is telling the truth about Jericho, which should tell you what? Joshua's an eyewitness account. How would anybody 1,000 years later, as the liberals say, they say Joshua was written 1,000 years later. How would they know what happened archaeologically at Jericho 1,000 years after it happened? They wouldn't. The Bible's telling the truth.
Well, if you look at what the majority of archaeologists agree the data indicate, they got it wrong. They saw these ruins, but misunderstood where they came from and what caused them. So most likely there was some social memory going around about the destruction of this city, and they built up this story around it. And one of the indications that Joshua was not written contemporary to the events it narrates is the fact that throughout Joshua you have multiple references to events that resulted in certain ruins or certain altars or certain states that you can go and see unto this day, as the text says in the more traditional translations. In other words, the narrative is very clearly written by someone generations after the events being narrated. This is also something that the overwhelming majority of scholars agree regarding the relationship of the narrative to the ostensible events being narrated. So, no, it's not because the Bible is telling the truth. This individual is misrepresenting where the state of the field currently stands. They are ignoring the more recent excavations. They are only giving you the arguments provided by the apologists. They are not giving you the counter arguments that actually have convinced the majority of relevant scholars. This is what apologetics does. Misrepresents things, gives you an incomplete picture, tries to perform confidence and conviction when that confidence and conviction is misplaced if you have the entire picture. That's one of the problems with apologetics. But since the primary goal of apologetics is to make people who already agree feel like they're justified in agreeing, that's what you have to do. You don't really have any other choice but to try to make your case sound ironclad, even when to do so requires ignoring the majority of the scholarship and misrepresenting the data. And the fit for this video, Superman.